know about you, but wouldn't you want to see some gameplay of Death Stranding?
I'm kind of thinking of showing the gameplay at Tokyo Game Show, but...
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another industry report. So, the gaming news out of Gamescom has came in hard and fast, and I wanted to talk to you about both the news and also what this new opening show actually means for the industry. Then of particular note today as well is Stadia's disappointing Connect and the genuine excitement around the Gamescom event. Now I'm coming to you as a disembodied voice because I'm actually at Gamescom, but I'm not on the consumer show floor. Instead I'm here for business, and I will be spending the next 4 days not wearing my YouTube hat, but instead my game developing hat as we go around pitching our game to publishers in the business area of the convention. First, the news. Over at the Inside Xbox show, the Games Pass team is pretty much knocking it out of the park. You've got Devil May Cry 5, Stellaris, Kingdom Come Deliverance, Age of Empires Definitive Edition, and quite a lot more. It's all part of a pretty reasonably priced subscription, and it's a good variety of games, which I think will work out pretty well for them. I hope this trend continues, although with how lucrative we've heard it is for developers to offer up their games in Game Pass, Microsoft are going to need some deep pockets to keep this up. There's only one issue that they need to solve right now, and that is parity between the PC and console versions. DMC5, for an example, is not available on PC Games Pass, but in fairness, PC Games Pass is labeled as beta right now. Still, that's pretty clearly their end goal, given their strategy so far, but the sooner they get there, the better. Now, as for Nintendo, well, Nintendo's Indie World presentation shows they're continuing to play to the Switch's strengths. They're selling old games that many people will not have had the chance to play. This includes Ori and the Blind Forest, thanks to their new partnership with Microsoft that's been talked about for quite some time. It's a good strategy overall, but it won't help with their clear weakness, and that is that some modern games just do prove to be a subpar experience on the Switch, like with Bloodstained, and that many third parties don't even bother to port over their larger titles. Saying that, displaying loads of indies like this, well, it obviously does look quite good for the Switch, and it really speaks to the variety of experiences that can be had on that platform. Next, though, we've got something a lot more rough, Stadia Connect. So overall, they had little to show, but of the new games that they did reveal, well, many were not that attention-grabbing, except for maybe the confirmation of Cyberpunk 2077, Watch Dogs Legion, and Borderlands 3 being available to stream on the platform. Now, that last one is a little bit strange. I suppose people could play Borderlands 3 on Stadia instead of Epic, but I think at this rate, the more conscientious objectors will probably avoid both. I think Farming Sim 2019 is also worth mentioning here. They brought it up and they talked about how accessibility is massive with Stadia, and again, it's just that usual line of having no expensive buy-in and it just being available on the streaming service regardless of your device. Though what continues to confuse me is that some games clearly would suffer immensely from the added latency, and they're still willing to be on Stadia. One of the games announced was Samurai Showdown, a recently released fighting game. Now, this game had a small controversy when they released a demo before the launch, where players found an unacceptable amount of input lag. Now, when measured by one community member, this was 8 frames of lag, or 133 ms, which is really not that far off the lag measured by Digital Foundry in their Stadia testing. The developer, SNK, responded by fixing it almost immediately, cutting that number in half, and flying a CM out to the community member with a fresh build for testing. Needless to say, though, that put them firmly in the good books with their community, but when you then see them on Stadia with similar amounts of latency, well, it's pretty obvious that, yeah, it would be a subpar experience, especially for that game. Now, the worst to come for Stadia, though, was further exclusivity. Orcs Must Die 3 has been announced as a timed exclusive on the platform. Now, exclusives that don't really appear to be uniquely using the benefits of the platform, I think that does feel a little bit off to me. Oddly enough, the developer did say we can tolerate latency in our gameplay, which is, like, as an aside, a bit strange because it does go against other developers claiming that latency on Stadia isn't an issue. They do also, though, say that Stadia works out in their favor, saying that they're trying to push as many objects on screen as possible, and they can have 500 orcs in one wave. Now, this is an example of using hardware effectively, but not necessarily uniquely, and while it's beneficial to the experience, it's clearly not a fundamental part of Stadia that's letting that happen. Altogether, really, Stadia just engaging in timed exclusivity along with Epic, it's not really a good look for the current market. Now, on that, there's an interesting angle. The Stadia team seem to be pretty aware that a lot of people are critical of them. The like-dislike ratio on the chat was disabled, and I can't help but wonder if their goal of accessibility in a broad audience is kind of, well, excluding existing core gamers in their plan, instead focusing on those who are less engaged in the hobby and the news cycle, as they've really made no attempts to alleviate the fears that core gamers have with the platform. Okay, onto the show itself. Gamescom Opening Night Live was basically a miniature version of the Game Awards, which interestingly brought the event closer to a sort of smaller, less corporate E3. The closest comparison that I could make is really if it was, say, a higher quality PC gaming show, but without the long interview segments that could get pretty awkward. Most of it was just Jeff Keighley on stage giving a few seconds of preamble for a ton of announcements and new trailers, which did make it one of the more efficient events that I've seen in gaming news. The overall news here is pretty hefty though. Over the 2 hours they showed and talked about 25 games, and that was with the last quarter being dedicated to Death Stranding. Quite a few of them were brand new announcements like Comanche, which is basically a helicopter and drone dogfighting game, and The Cycle, which is a PvEVP competitive quest shooter that promised not to be a cookie cutter game. Sega's big AAA game turned out to be developed by Amplitude and called Humankind, something that the speculation was on the mark with, although I don't think that most people would have guessed it would be a grand strategy game about alternate history paths and where they could take civilization on a cultural level. Then V1 Interactive, the studio founded by ex-Bungie creative director Marcus Letho, finally showed off Disintegration, a first-person shooter where you command some AI allies from your grav cycle. Basically, you're on a well-armed hovership blasting stuff while directing and protecting your squad, both in single-player campaign and in multiplayer. They then had other announcements like Little Nightmares 2 and Kerbal Space Program 2, so the production here really did manage to grab a fantastic variety of games to get everyone excited. And I think the most interesting part of this is how it felt and how it was received. There was an immediate excitement because of the wealth of content at the show, and it seems like nobody reasonable walked away unhappy with it. It peaked somewhere around 100,000 viewers across multiple platforms, including a few restreamers and watch-alongs that had many thousands on top of the 50 to 60k that YouTube had and the 30k that Twitch seemed to hover around. Now, there were some segments that felt like they belonged at E3, but basically just had the games not be ready in time, like the Need for Speed Heat, which seems like a good enough celebration of the franchise's history. Beyond that, though, because of the speed of the show, they had times where smaller games like Erica and Iron Harvest 1920 Plus, which took a shot at Epic in their trailer by saying, by PC release, we mean Steam and other platforms, which was very well timed too, as the show had just played an Epic Store showcase trailer a few minutes prior. Next, though, we had the Death Stranding segment. The game looks quite inventive, even if what most people will take away from it is the more memeable aspect. I think it's just another example of heavy-handed Japanese writing and theming that is kind of pulpy and enjoyable. It looks like a unique enough package. That said, though, I'm loath to rain in people's parade here, but the cheering for Kojima, I think it's beginning to get, well, cult-like. It's quite weird. It's getting closer and closer to hero worship as time goes on, and I think the reverence of an auteur is the quickest way to ruin both their work and your own ability to enjoy their work honestly. There really was no need for Death Stranding to be 1/4 of the show, although I'll admit that Jeff can run a good show, and both he and the audience, online and in person, seem to enjoy themselves a lot, especially with the extended Kojima segment. As a sort of a conclusion, the news cycle is clearly getting faster and faster. E3 is not the be-all and-all of games publicity anymore. With Gamescom and the Game Awards, there are now multiple chances during a year to get your game at a really, really big event. This is something that can only help devs, and in a few ways. More opportunities means more developers who otherwise, would not make the cut will now actually get a chance, and it could also do a lot to stop the extreme crunching that goes into getting games ready for E3. If you miss E3, well, you'll get a chance at Gamescom 2 months later, and I'm sure that's going to be great for a lot of studios. If you can't show things off at Gamescom, well, you're probably going to release the next year anyway, so you can start your marketing hard at the Game Awards. It's just another exciting element to watch, and ultimately, I think this sort of thing will end up carrying the same weight as E3 does in getting consumers, well, sometimes needlessly hyped over a future product via crowd dynamics, but let's not get too cynical for now. In fact, there's one more thing of note here. Almost every game was due out 2019 or 2020. Unlike E3's past, this had no concept being announced. Even games that were shown for the first time, like Disintegration, were given 2020 release dates. I think the industry has, across the board, learned a bit of a lesson here. Sadly, all that took was dozens of games failing as a result, and then, well, Anthem, I suppose, came in and finished the job. Overall, though, I'm looking forward to the future. I think more smaller events spread across the year will be a more healthy news cycle, and there'll just be more interesting things for us to talk about. So there you go, that's our overview and review of Opening Night Live at Gamescom, and with that done, I'm going to have to put on my game developer hat and go to Gamescom itself and get talking to publishers and other people. So thank you very much for watching this video, and with that, I will see you next time.